It includes details on what Betsy Hackman was searching for before she died and the first-person view of the officers.
A cloud of suspicion surrounds the deaths of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, whose bodies were found in their Santa Fe home. No one had seen the couple for days, and authorities say they had been dead for some time.
There are stories that begin with a simple headline and slowly unravel into something far more unsettling. The deaths of legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Orokoa became one of those stories almost overnight. When news first broke that the Oscar-winning actor had died at his secluded Santa Fe property, most people assumed the explanation would be painfully ordinary. Hackman was in his 90s. He had stepped away from Hollywood decades earlier. Public appearances had become rare. To the outside world, it looked like the final quiet chapter of a long life. But as investigators entered the estate and began reconstructing the final days inside that isolated home, the story became much darker, stranger, and far more complicated than anyone expected. And at the center of it all was a discovery involving DNA evidence that completely changed the direction of the investigation. Before going further, it is important to separate reality from internet fiction. There is no verified evidence that Gene Hackman owned a secret tunnel or that federal agencies uncovered classified biological experiments beneath his property. Many viral stories online have mixed speculation with fabricated details. What follows is based on the real public reporting surrounding the investigation into the deaths, combined with a careful examination of how forensic evidence and unanswered questions created an atmosphere of suspicion. The true story is already disturbing enough without inventing supernatural conspiracies or fake government cover-ups. The Santa Fe property itself played a major role in how the mystery developed. Hackman and Betsy Orokoa had spent years living away from the spotlight in New Mexico. Friends described the couple as extremely private. Their home was hidden behind gates and surrounded by desert landscape, making it difficult for neighbors or outsiders to notice anything unusual. When authorities finally arrived at the residence after concerns were raised, investigators discovered that both Hackman and Orokoa had likely been dead for several days. That detail alone immediately complicated the timeline. Questions began piling up almost instantly. Who died first? Why had nobody heard from them? And what exactly had happened inside that isolated home during those final days? As officers entered the property, the atmosphere reportedly felt eerie. Not because of hidden tunnels or cinematic secrets, but because of the silence. Rooms appeared untouched. Everyday objects remained where they had last been used. It looked less like the scene of a violent crime and more like a life that had simply stopped in the middle of ordinary routines. Yet investigators quickly realized that reconstructing those routines would not be simple. Determining the sequence of events became critical, especially because the deaths of both Hackman and Orokoa appeared to involve very different medical circumstances. One of the most widely discussed elements of the investigation involved Betsy Orokoa's internet searches and communications in the days before her death. Reports indicated that she had been researching flu-like symptoms and medical concerns. At first glance, those searches might not sound significant. Millions of people search symptoms online every day. But in the context of the investigation, they became deeply important because they suggested that someone inside the house may have realized that something was seriously wrong before help was ever called. Investigators reportedly focused heavily on timelines, when devices were used, when messages stopped, and whether either person attempted to contact medical professionals. This is where DNA evidence entered the story and dramatically changed public perception. In modern forensic investigations, DNA is not just about identifying a suspect in a crime. It helps investigators reconstruct movements, interactions, timelines, and environments. Every surface in a home can potentially hold biological traces. Skin cells on door handles, hair strands on furniture, saliva on cups, fingerprints mixed with sweat residue. In a case where two people died under uncertain circumstances and remained undiscovered for days, DNA becomes essential for understanding exactly what happened inside the home during the final hours. According to public reporting, forensic teams carefully processed the property for biological evidence. That does not mean they uncovered sinister experiments or hidden underground facilities. It means investigators followed standard procedure in a high-profile death investigation where the timeline was unclear. DNA sampling would have been used to confirm who touched specific objects, which areas of the home were recently occupied, and whether there was evidence of outside intrusion. In a case surrounded by rumors, those scientific details mattered because they helped separate fact from speculation. Still, the lack of immediate answers allowed online theories to spread rapidly. Some claimed there had been evidence hidden beneath the property. Others suggested authorities discovered sealed rooms or underground spaces. The phrase secret tunnel exploded across social media because it sounded cinematic and mysterious. But no credible law enforcement source has confirmed the existence of any elaborate underground tunnel connected to the investigation. What actually fueled the rumors was the combination of isolation, delayed discovery, and unanswered forensic questions. People naturally filled the gaps with imagination. What made the real story emotionally powerful was not hidden chambers or government conspiracies. It was the possibility that two people spent their final days completely alone inside a silent house while illness and confusion slowly took over. Investigators reportedly examined whether Hackman, because of his advanced age and health condition, may have been unable to respond appropriately after Orokowa's death. That possibility changed the tone of the investigation entirely. Instead of a sensational thriller, the case increasingly resembled a tragic story about aging, isolation, and vulnerability.
Yet the DNA evidence remained central because it provided investigators with one of the few objective ways to reconstruct the final sequence of events. Biological traces can reveal whether a room was recently entered, whether objects were moved, or whether medical supplies were handled. In cases involving decomposed remains or delayed discovery, DNA and forensic chemistry often become more reliable than eyewitness testimony. There are no emotions in those results. No assumptions, just microscopic evidence waiting to be interpreted. Another important aspect often misunderstood online is how forensic investigations are conducted after unattended deaths. When authorities encounter a scene involving multiple deceased individuals, they frequently process the property with the same caution used in potential criminal cases until natural causes can be confirmed. That means collecting biological samples, examining medications, checking environmental conditions, and documenting every detail. To internet conspiracy communities, those procedures can look dramatic or suspicious. In reality, they are standard protocol. The fascination with the case also reflected something larger about Gene Hackman himself. He was never a celebrity who constantly invited public attention into his private life. Unlike many Hollywood figures, he disappeared almost completely after retirement. That privacy created a vacuum around him. When tragedy finally struck, the absence of public information made every small detail feel enormous. A simple forensic report suddenly became headline news. A timeline discrepancy turned into viral speculation. DNA evidence, which is routine in investigations, became transformed online into proof of hidden secrets. And yet, there is one reason the DNA findings truly mattered. They reportedly helped investigators establish that there was no clear evidence of an intruder or violent struggle inside the property. In other words, the biological evidence may have narrowed the investigation away from foul play. That is a crucial distinction because many online stories intentionally ignore it. DNA evidence did not necessarily reveal some horrifying criminal conspiracy connected to Hackman. Instead, it may have helped rule one out. But emotionally, the case still disturbed people because of the image it created. Imagine an isolated estate where communication slowly stops. Imagine investigators walking through quiet hallways trying to determine what happened day by day. Imagine forensic teams collecting traces of DNA from ordinary household objects, attempting to reconstruct the final moments of two lives from microscopic fragments left behind on surfaces. That reality is haunting enough on its own. As more details emerged, public discussion shifted toward questions surrounding elder care and isolation. Experts pointed out that elderly individuals living privately can become especially vulnerable during medical emergencies, particularly if both partners experience health issues simultaneously. In many ways, the tragedy highlighted how quickly a household can fall silent without anyone realizing something is wrong. The forensic investigation became not just a search for answers, but also a reminder how fragile human routines really are. Some reports suggested investigators carefully reviewed medication records, digital activity, and environmental conditions inside the home. Again, this is normal in complex death investigations. Toxicology testing, medical histories, and biological evidence are all pieces of the same puzzle. DNA alone does not tell the entire story. It works alongside pathology, digital forensics, and scene reconstruction. Together, those disciplines help investigators move from uncertainty toward probability. One reason the internet became obsessed with the phrase bad news for him is because people assumed the DNA evidence must have exposed wrongdoing by Hackman himself. But the available public information does not support sensational accusations. There's been no verified evidence that Hackman committed crimes connected to the deaths. Instead, the bad news was more likely reputational and emotional. The investigation exposed painful realities about the couple's final days: isolation, medical decline, and the possibility that one partner may have been unable to help the other. That kind of truth often unsettles audiences more than fictional conspiracies because it feels real. Aging is real. Cognitive decline is real. Medical emergencies happening behind closed doors are real. A silent house where nobody notices something is wrong for days is real. DNA evidence in this context was not the key to uncovering an underground secret empire. It was a scientific tool investigators used to piece together a profoundly sad human story. The mythology surrounding the case also reveals how modern audiences consume mystery. Social media rewards dramatic narratives. A headline about DNA evidence from a secret tunnel spreads faster than a detailed explanation of forensic protocols. Conspiracy theories are emotionally exciting because they transform ordinary tragedy into epic hidden warfare between secrets and truth. But the authentic story surrounding Gene Hackman's final days does not need fictional embellishment to leave an impact. There is another layer to this story that often gets overlooked. Gene Hackman spent decades portraying complicated characters on screen: detectives, criminals, survivors, authority figures. Audiences became used to seeing him at the center of mysteries and moral conflicts. When real tragedy entered his life, people unconsciously framed the investigation like one of his movies. Every unexplained detail felt like a clue leading towards some massive revelation. But real investigations are rarely cinematic. They are slower, quieter, and often more heartbreaking. The officers and forensic teams who entered the property were not searching for movie-style twists. They were trying to establish facts. They examined biological traces, environmental evidence, digital records, and medical information because that is how unanswered deaths are investigated. DNA became part of the process because science provides clarity where assumptions fail. In the end, that evidence may have done exactly what it was supposed to do: help authorities determine that the tragedy was rooted in medical and personal circumstances rather than elaborate criminal activity. Still, the unanswered emotional questions remain powerful. What were the final conversations? Between Hackman and Arakawa? Did either of them realize how serious the situation had become? How long did silence fill the house before anyone outside noticed? Those are the kinds of questions forensic science cannot fully answer. DNA can identify contact. Toxicology can identify substances. Timelines can identify sequences. But none of them can fully reconstruct fear, confusion, grief, or loneliness. And perhaps that is why the story continues to fascinate people. Beneath all the internet exaggeration is a deeply human fear. The fear of disappearing quietly unseen behind closed doors. The investigation into Gene Hackman's death forced the public to confront that fear in a way few celebrity stories ever do. Instead of glamour or scandal, the headlines became dominated by forensic evidence, timelines, and silence. In the end, the most important thing to remember is this: authentic investigations matter because facts matter. The internet often transforms uncertainty into fantasy, especially when famous names are involved. But there is a difference between mystery and misinformation. No verified evidence has shown secret government operations, biological experiments, or hidden tunnel conspiracies connected to Gene Hackman's property. What investigators actually uncovered was far more grounded in reality. Evidence of two lives ending tragically inside an isolated home, with forensic science struggling to reconstruct the final days left behind. The DNA evidence did not reveal monsters beneath the house. It revealed the ordinary biological traces people leave behind in the spaces they inhabit every day. And in this case, those traces became the final silent witnesses to a tragedy that the world is still trying to understand.